This is one of its peculiar institutions, for it is a shire town. I began to comprehend what its inhabitants were about. In the morning, our breakfasts were put together through the hole in the door in small oblong square tin pans made to fit, and holding a pint of chocolate with brown bread and an iron spoon. When they called for the vessels again, I was green enough to return what bread I had left, but my comrade seized it and said that I should lay that up for lunch or dinner. Soon after, he was let out to work at haying in a neighboring field, whither he went every day, and would not be back till noon. So he bade me goodbye, saying that he doubted if he should see me again. When I came out of prison, for someone interfered and paid that tax, I did not perceive that great changes had taken place on the common, such as he observed who went in a youth and emerged tottering and gray-headed man. And yet a change had to my eyes come over the scene. The town, the state, the country, greater than any that mere time could affect. I saw yet more distinctly the state in which I lived. I saw to what extent the people among whom I lived could be trusted as good neighbors and friends, that their friendship was for summer weather only, that they did not greatly propose to do right, that they were a distinct race from me by their prejudices and superstitions, as the Chinamen and Malays are, that in their sacrifices to humanity they ran no risks, not even to their property, that after all they were not so noble, but they treated the thief as he had treated them, and hoped, by a certain outward observance and a few prayers, and by walking in a particular straight through useless path from time to time, to save their souls. This may be to judge my neighbors harshly, but for I believe that many of them are not aware that they have such institution as jail in their village. It was formerly the custom in our village, when a poor debtor came out of jail, for his acquaintances to salute him, looking through their fingers, which were crossed to represent the grating of a jail window. "How do ye do?" My neighbors did not thus salute me, but first looked at me, and then at one another, as if I had returned from a long journey. I was put into jail as I was going to the shoemaker's to get a shoe, which was mended. When I was let out the next morning, I proceeded to finish my errand, and having put on my mended shoe, joined a huckleberry party who were impatient to put themselves under my conduct. And in half an hour, for the horse was soon tackled, was in the midst of a huckleberry field on one of our highest hills 2 miles off, and then the state was nowhere to be seen. This is the whole history of my prisons. I have never declined paying the highway tax, because I am as desirous of being a good neighbor as I am of being a bad subject. And as for supporting schools, I am doing my part to educate my fellow countrymen now. It is for no particular item in the tax bill that I refuse to pay it. I simply wish to refuse allegiance to the state, to withdraw and stand aloof from it effectually. I do not care to trace the course of my dollar, if I could, till it buys a man or a musket to shoot one with. The dollar is innocent, but I am concerned to trace the effects of my allegiance. In fact, I quietly declare war with the state, after my fashion, though I will still make what use and get what advantage I can of her, as is usual in such cases. If others pay the tax which is demanded of me, from a sympathy with the state, they do but what they have already done in their own case, or rather they abet injustice to a greater extent than the state requires. If they pay the tax from a mistaken interest in the individual taxed to save his property or prevent his going to jail, it is because they have not considered wisely how far they let their private feelings interfere with the public good. This, then, is my position at present. One cannot be too much on his guard in such case, lest his action be biased by obstinacy or an undue regard for the opinions of men. Let him see that he does only what belonged to himself and to the hour. I think sometimes, why, this people mean well. They are only ignorant. They would do better if they knew how. Why give your neighbors this pain to treat you as they are not inclined to? But I think again, this is no reason why I should do as they do, or permit others to suffer much greater pain on a different kind. Again, I sometimes say to myself, when many millions of men, without heat, without ill will, without personal feeling of any kind, demand of you a few shillings, only without the possibility, such is their constitution, of retracting or altering their present demand, and without the possibility, on your side, of appeal to any other millions, why expose yourself to this overwhelming brute force? You do not resist cold and hunger, the winds and the waves. Thus obstinately, you quietly submit to 1,000 similar necessities. You do not put your head into the fire, but just in proportion as I regard this as not wholly a brute force, but partly a human force, and consider that I have relations to those millions as to so many millions of men, and not of mere brute or inanimate things, I see that appeal is possible, first and instantaneously, from them to the maker of them, and secondly, from them to themselves. But if I put my head deliberately into the fire, there is no appeal to fire or to the maker of fire, and I have only myself to blame. If I can convince myself that I have any right to be satisfied with men as they are, and to treat them accordingly, and not accordingly in some respects, to my requisitions and expectations of what they and I ought to be, then, like a good Mussulman and fatalist, I should endeavor to be satisfied with things as they are, and say it is the will of God. And above all, there is this difference between resisting this and a purely brute or natural force, that I can resist this with some effect. But I cannot expect, like Orpheus, to change the nature of the rocks and the trees and beasts. I do not wish to quarrel with any man or nation. I do not wish to split hairs, to make fine distinctions, or set myself up as better than my neighbors. I seek rather, I may say, even an excuse for conforming to the laws of the land. I am but too ready to conform to them. Indeed, I have reason to suspect myself on this head, and each year, as the tax gatherer comes around, I find myself disposed to review the acts and position of the general and state governments, and the spirit of the people to discover a pretext for conformity. We must affect our country as our parents, and if at any time we alienate our love or industry from doing it honor, we must respect effects and teach the soul, matter of conscience and religion, and not desire the rule or benefit. I believe that the state will soon be able to take all my work of this sort out of my hands, and then I shall be no better a patriot than my fellow countrymen. Seen from a lower point of view, the Constitution, with all its faults, is very good. The law and the courts are very respectable. Even this state and this American government are, in many respects, very admirable and rare things to be thankful for, such as a great many have described them. But seen from a point of view a little higher, they are what I have described them. Seen from a higher still, and the highest, who shall say what they are, or that they are worth looking at or thinking of at all? However, the government does not concern me much, and I shall bestow the fewest possible thoughts on it. It is not many moments that I live under a free government, even in this world. If a man is thought-free, fancy-free, imagination-free, that which is not never for a long time appearing to be to him, unwise rulers or reformers cannot fatally interrupt him. I know that most men think differently from myself, but those whose lives are by profession devoted to the study of these or kindred subjects content me as little as any. Statesmen and legislators, standing so completely within this institution, never distinctly and nakedly behold it. They speak of moving society, but have no resting place without it. They may be men of certain experience and discrimination, and have no doubt invented ingenious and even useful systems, for which we sincerely thank them, but all their wit and usefulness lie within certain not very wide limits. They are wont to forget that the world is not governed by policy and expediency. Webster never goes behind government, and so cannot speak with authority about it. His words are wisdom to those legislators who contemplate no essential reform in the existing government, but for thinkers and those who legislate for all time, he never once glances at the subject. I know of those whose serene and wise speculations on this theme would soon reveal the limits of his mind, range, and hospitality. Yet, compared with the cheap professions of most reformers, and the still cheaper wisdom and eloquence of politicians in general, his are almost the only sensible and valuable words, and we thank heaven for him. Comparatively, he is always strong, original, and above all practical. Still, his quality is not wisdom, but prudence. The lawyer's truth is not the truth, but consistency or a constant expediency. Truth is always in harmony with herself, and is not concerned chiefly to reveal the justice that may consist with wrongdoing. He well deserves to be called, and he has been called, the defender of the Constitution. There are really no blows to be given by him but defensive ones. He is not a leader but a follower. His leaders are the men of '87. I have never made an effort, he says, and never proposed to make an effort. I have never countenanced an effort, and never mean to countenance an effort to disturb the arrangement as originally made, by which the various states came into the Union. Still thinking of the sanction which the Constitution gives to slavery, he says, because it was a part of the original compact, let it stand. Notwithstanding his special acuteness and ability, he is unable to take a fact out of its merely political relations and behold it as it lies absolutely to be disposed of by the intellect. What, for instance, it behooves a man to do here in America today with regard to slavery, but ventures or is driven to make some such desperate answer as the following, while professing to speak absolutely and as a private man, from which what new and singular code of social duties might be inferred. The manner, says he, in which the governments of the states where slavery exists are to regulate it is for their own consideration under their responsibility to their constituents, to the general laws of propriety, humanity, and justice, and to God. Associations formed elsewhere, springing from a feeling of humanity or any other cause, have nothing whatever to do with it. They have never received any encouragement from me, and they never will. They who know of no purer sources of truth, who have traced up its stream no higher, stand, and wisely stand, by the Bible and the Constitution, and drink at it there with reverence and humility. But they who behold where it comes trickling into this lake or that pool, gird up their loins once more, and continue their pilgrimage toward its fountainhead. No man with a genius for legislation has appeared in America. They are rare in the history of the world. They are orators, politicians, eloquent men by the thousand. But the speaker has not yet opened his mouth to speak, who is capable of settling the much vexed questions of the day. We love eloquence for its own sake, and not for any truth which it may utter, or any heroism it may inspire. Our legislators have not yet learned the comparative value of free trade, and of freedom, of union, and of rectitude to a nation. They have no genius of talent for comparatively humble questions of taxation and finance, commerce and manufacturers, and agriculture. If we were left solely to the wordy wit of legislators in Congress for our guidance, uncorrected by the seasonable experience and the effectual complaints of the people, America would not long retain her rank among the nations. For 1800 years, though perchance I have no right to say it, the New Testament has been written. Yet where is the legislator who has the wisdom and practical talent enough to avail himself of the light which it sheds on the science of legislation? The authority of government, even such as I am willing to submit to, for I will cheerfully obey those who know and can do better than I, and in many things even those who neither know nor can do so well, is still an impure one. To be strictly just, it must have the sanction and consent of the governed. It can have no pure right over my person and property, but what I concede to it. The progress from an absolute to a limited monarchy, from a limited monarchy to a democracy, is a progress toward a true respect for the individual. Even the Chinese philosopher was wise enough to regard the individual as the basis of the empire. Is a democracy, such as we know it, the last improvement possible in government? Is it not possible to take a step further toward recognizing and organizing the rights of man? There will never be a really free and enlightened state until the state comes to recognize the individual as a higher and independent power from which all its own power and authority are derived, and treats him accordingly. I please myself with imagining a state at last which can afford to be just to all men, and to treat the individual with respect as a neighbor, which even would not think it inconsistent with its own repose, if a few were to live aloof from it, not meddling with it, nor embraced by it, who fulfilled all the duties of neighbors and fellow men. A state which bore this kind of fruit, and suffered it to drop off as fast as it ripened, would prepare the way for a still more perfect and glorious state, which also I have imagined, but not yet anywhere seen. And that is it for Civil Disobedience by Henry David Thoreau. I want to read this one thing one more time. It can have no pure right over my person and property but what I concede to it. I like that line. All right, later.